Governor Jerry Brown and leading California legislators are preparing to greet President Donald Trump with defiance. Mexico and the U.S. are trying to speed up an accord on the Colorado River water before Trump takes office. And a writer on climate issues finds a possible silver lining for California in a Trump presidency. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Michael Smolens, politics editor for the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Michael.
Mark, good to be here.
Good to have you back again. Chris Genowine, editor and publisher of the Times of San Diego. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Mark. Good to be here.
Good to see you. Sandra Dibble, who covers Mexico and border issues for the Union Tribune. Hi, Sandra.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're glad you're here today. And freelance energy and environment reporter Craig Rose. Hi, Craig.
Hi, Mark.
Good to see you today. Well, Hillary Clinton with more than 8.7 million votes had nearly twice as many supporters as Donald Trump in California. So it's not surprising that leaders in the nation's most populous state are vowing to lead the way in fighting the new Trump administration at every turn. Here's Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon.
We have to do whatever it takes to protect California and its people from the reactionary onslaught we expect out of Washington, D.C. That includes immigrants.
All right, so Michael, that was a role that Texas and other red states played when Republicans set about blocking President Barack Obama during his administration. Who among our states, many Democratic leaders are defying Trump already?
You'd probably be better off trying to list who isn't.
Who's not. Okay.
Yeah. Of course, Jerry Brown, although it's interesting, Jerry Brown had to start off with a little bit of a wait-and-see approach, but particularly on climate change, he's gotten more aggressive recently. But you had Rendon, the Speaker, Senate President De Leon, UC President Napolitano. I mean, the list just grows and grows. Also factoring this, I think, quite frankly, are the politics of the 2018 gubernatorial election. You've got Gavin Newsom and others. So at one point, it almost seemed like they were trying to outdo each other. Having said that, there's serious concern, obviously, that California being the quote-unquote progressive state, they view a lot of threats to their climate change and immigration policies from the incoming administration.
So Chris, Michael mentioned immigration, climate change. What are some of the other issues that they're concerned about with the Trump administration?
Well, there's certainly water. Trump talked a lot about making it easy for California farmers to get water. There's education. There could certainly be some opposition there. And interestingly, marijuana. California is now the largest state where marijuana is legalized, and it's still illegal on a federal level, and there could be some issues there. But I think that it's environment and immigration that are going to be key. And of course, California is very well prepared to fight.
Let's get into another bite here. This is Senate President Pro Tem. Kevin De Leon with his list of issues. And again, these are all California Democrats with these issues.
And that we continue to be a world leader on workers' rights, women's rights, voting rights, civil rights, social justice, economic justice, climate action, environmental protection, and access to health care and public education for everyone, irrespective of who you are and where you come from.
All right, a lot of support there in Sacramento. Now, what tools will they have to put up a fight as we go forward? California is, after all, just one of 50 states.
Well, they've passed a lot of legislation in California to protect certain undocumented immigrants. We know about the tuition fees that have been waived. If people are here under certain circumstances, even if they're unauthorized immigrants, they do count for in-state tuition. What some of the things they're talking about are actually legislation has been introduced to fund attorneys and to train attorneys to protect immigrants should we get this big sweeping deportation. Now, before we get too far down the line, I think that we don't know exactly what Trump's going to do. He talked a lot, and that immigration really was his key ace during the primary campaign. He toned it down a little bit. He's talked about looking at, going after criminal immigrants, and how that will be defined, I think, will be the key thing. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people that even support, unauthorized immigrants that are here just, playing by the rules except for being here illegally, I think that they want bad actors out of here as well. But is he going to go after people that are repeat entry folks that now have, felony charges against them, or are they people that are doing more heinous things? So we'll have to see. But they're clearly talking about gearing up, and it's not just the state of California, but I think officials in Los Angeles and San Francisco are talking about spending real money to help defend these folks should deportations come in a sweeping way.
Go ahead, Chris.
In some ways, California has been bracing for this possibility for several years. Back last year, there was a package of bills under the name of Immigrant-Shaped California that really covered the waterfront, if you will, everything from health care to protecting identities of undocumented to making money available to fight deportation orders. And as Michael said, locally, there's real money. I think it's $12 million in the city and county of Los Angeles that have been set aside for legal fights. And even here in San Diego Unified has made a plea to Donald Trump to protect the students who are covered by DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So there's a lot of effort happening both on the local and the state level.
Well, it's interesting, how things have changed so much, because not too long ago, the governor and other Californians, Lorena Gonzalez, had some key legislation, our assemblywoman from San Diego, and they were going to lead the federal government. Their friend Barack Obama, they viewed, was too far behind on bringing unauthorized immigrants into the mainstream and so forth. Now they're fighting a rearguard action, they view at even before, when they had a so-called sympathetic administration. So it is interesting that they're out in front, sort of in a different way, potentially coming in with this new administration.
What about on the medical front, health care coverage in general? California's had a pretty robust marketplace under Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. What happens to all of that? And again, we have to see what specifically the Republicans are going to do.
That's a real concern because California probably has the most healthy state insurance market of any under Obamacare. But if we don't get the federal subsidies, we could certainly be hurt here. Undocumented immigrants are eligible, I believe, now for Medi-Cal. It might mean that we have to spend more money locally to fund Medi-Cal. That would be
or cut the rolls somehow,
or cut the rolls,
some combination of both.
In some way.
Yeah. Now, one of the ways that I mentioned the red states were blocking the Obama administration during his terms was through lawsuits. And I imagine California and other states will be suing various agencies or suing the Trump administration on several fronts. Does that mean that the state attorney general, who's a new person now with Kamala Harris moving on to the U.S. Senate, becomes a more powerful individual in California?
Well, perhaps certainly, I don't want to say more prominent, because Kamala Harris was very prominent, but that seems to be a role that people are expecting of Javier Becerra, and he seems to be taking on. Ironically, the rhetoric is a lot more heated from other folks. He seems to be more measured, but he talks about defending, basically the California way when it comes to immigrants and other things, climate change and so forth. Looking at Texas, they made a lot of noise. They spent a lot of money. I think it was a Texas Tribune. I just took a look. They did a sort of a catalog of all the legal action from Texas, and by mid-year this past year, it was like nearly 50 lawsuits, both being sued and suing the federal government, more of the latter, and like $6 million they had spent on climate change, on medical care, immigration, and so forth. They've got sort of a mixed record, but one of the things they pointed out, even if they're ultimately unsuccessful, they think that if they can delay certain policies under the Obama administration, that would help them, whether they're businesses or people, however they viewed it. I think you might see the same thing there, that winning obviously is the goal, but the other goal might be to just prolong and keep stalling as much as possible.
The new Attorney General has a very interesting background for taking a leading role in this.
The State Attorney General.
Yes, State Attorney General.
Ask about the
he's represented the central L.A. area since 1993, and he rose to leadership in the House Democratic Caucus. So he knows Washington, but he's the son of Mexican immigrants. He's a Stanford-educated lawyer. So in many ways, I think he's a very tough and knowledgeable adversary on exactly what will be probably the key issue, which is immigration, and to a lesser extent, environment.
Now, speaking of attorney generals, Donald Trump's tapped Senator Jeff Sessions, one of the most conservative U.S. senators with a long history, was blocked actually from becoming a federal judge at one point due to some accusations about racism in his past. What's that relationship going to be like with the U.S. Department of Justice in California? Any speculation, crystal balling there?
That's going to be tough. Jeff Sessions was probably better known not for not for his legal positions over the last decade or so, but for his opposition to immigration. He was a voice in Alabama and on the national level very much opposed to illegal immigration, undocumented immigration. And so I think it's on immigration that there will be the biggest challenge between California, some other states as well, and the federal government.
Okay.
And you know, certainly there's concern about some of the comments he's made regarding civil rights issues and stuff like that. But yeah, Chris is right. Immigration seems to be the focus of so much in terms of the appointments. Locally here, we've got a U.S. attorney opening, which we would have had regardless, but we know now that the U.S. attorney is moving on to Superior Court. And it'll be very interesting to see what kind of person the Trump administration picks, because this is a key immigration area. Right here on the border. You know, I'd be surprised if it wasn't somebody that had a pretty hard line. All
right, lots to look at and watch about. We are going to turn now to an issue we heard an awful lot about from Trump in the campaign: Mexico, Mexicans, and immigration. We're going to dive a little deeper into that. Trump often bashed undocumented immigrants as murderers and rapists, not always. Here he is in August in Mexico with the president, and let's hear what he had to say.
And I happen to have a tremendous feeling for Mexican Americans, not only in terms of friendships, but in terms of the tremendous numbers that I employ in the United States. And they are amazing people, amazing people.
Didn't mention the rapists and murderers down there. Remind us, why was he there? What did he say? How was that received?
Oh, he was there at the invitation of Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto, who had made overtures also to Hillary Clinton, but she did not go down. Trump did accept the invitation. It turned out to a great political cost for Enrique Peña Nieto. He was brutally criticized because this was the man who had said some disparaging things about Mexicans, and he had also said that he was going to build a big, beautiful wall and have Mexico pay for it. The Mexican president was heavily criticized for not bringing these out in public. He later said, oh, well, we talked about this in private and Mexico would never pay for the wall. But it did not go over well politically in Mexico to have Trump there. It sort of gave him a legitimacy, is what critics feared.
All right, well, another issue that came up was the North American Free Trade Agreement, a lot in the campaign. And Trump has complained we're getting played by our southern neighbor in Mexico. Remind us, what is NAFTA? It's been around a couple of decades now, the impact it's had on Mexico and particularly our cross-border region.
It's a giant trade bloc between U.S., Mexico, Canada. On January 1st, it's going to be 23 years old. Trade has boomed under NAFTA from about 80 billion a year to 580 billion.
That's U.S. trade with Mexico.
Yes, both ways, bilateral trade with Mexico. I was reading in Politico a figure this morning that says that 14 million U.S. jobs depend on NAFTA. You know, and Mexico, I think, has been transformed through NAFTA. It's become what I always hear, a manufacturing powerhouse in the past 2 decades.
And the maquiladoras are these plants down there that have blossomed under this agreement and all. Now, you covered a big convention of those folks from all over the country, all over Mexico. What are the business people in Mexico saying about the coming Trump presidency?
I think very cautious. I think they're listening. I think people are very aware of, well, what did he say in the campaign, but what will the president do? And I think the hope is that, you know, the president-elect is a businessman and he'll understand business. So I even know people in the maquiladora industry who told me they voted for Trump. So it's not so clear-cut as you might think.
Okay, so campaign rhetoric might be one thing and what happens might be another. Chris?
Hasn't NAFTA become so key to the production supply lines of many companies that if you got rid of it, if you put in big tariffs, wouldn't, for example, it be hard to make cars efficiently in the United States?
Yes, one figure that NAFTA proponents are always throwing out is that 40% of the content of U.S. imports from Mexico are made in the U.S. So so not only would you be decreasing jobs in Mexico, you'd be decreasing jobs in the U.S. It's so integrated, it's hard to separate out the two.
But curiously, under the 20 years of NAFTA, the benefits of the trade agreement have not really been spread around. I mean, there's 3 or 4 million people working in the maquiladora industry, But as I understand it, wages in Mexico have stagnated in the 20 years, and the nation has grown very slowly overall. So it's been good for a sector of the Mexican economy, but it hasn't splashed through the entire Mexican economy.
What you're hitting on, I think, is what was a big part of Trump's victory, is that NAFTA and all these trade agreements were supposed to, sort of lift all boats, if you will, the rising tide. That was how they were sold to the great American public. And a lot of people just aren't feeling that. The economy is doing much better than it had been, certainly, since the Great Recession, and we know unemployment's down a great deal. But the kinds of jobs have gone, and I don't know if people thought, okay, this is going to mean manufacturing is coming back, which probably never will in the way it had. But yeah, that in a political sense, that there was a lot of benefit, but a lot of the voting public just didn't feel it, or didn't feel it like they thought they were going to, and I think that had a lot to do with Trump's victory.
I was actually referring to the Mexican side.
Right,
but true on both sides.
Yeah, riffing off that, absolutely.
Very interesting. Andrew, I want to change gears a little bit here. You had a story on a major deal between U.S. and Mexico regarding Colorado River water, obviously a huge issue in this part of the world. Tell us about that agreement and its importance and the kind of the clock's ticking on that, right?
Yes. It is under the 1944 Colorado River Water Treaty. Mexico has a certain amount of water guaranteed. Updates, really precisions to this treaty are called minutes. Back in 2012, we signed a minute that it involved setting aside water for the environment, and it involved Mexico's ability to store water in Lake Mead, which benefited both of us because it raises the level of Lake Mead and delays any shortage, any calls for shortages on both sides. So the clock is ticking because at the end of 2017, that agreement ends. We are now working on a successor agreement between the U.S. and Mexico. There has been some pressure to speed up and
because key players on the U.S. side are leaving, right?
They're leaving, and it's not just, Trump's coming in and,
right.
But people who have the institutional memory and maybe the political clout and the relationships with Congress are leaving.
Right,
there's pressure.
Water will be another key issue. Before we got about a minute left in this segment, I did want to get back to NAFTA and all, and what the point Craig was making. One point it seemed that neither Clinton nor Trump or in the press brought up in terms of Mexican workers, Chinese workers, these trade deals and all, was automation and the effect it has on costing Americans manufacturing jobs. It's easy to demonize perhaps a worker from Mexico or China, but maybe not so much to demonize a robot or a software program improvement. Your thoughts on that?
Automation is a curious thing. When you raise wages, you encourage automation, which is a good thing for society because you want us to be more productive. So it's a two-edged sword.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but nothing much was made of that. It's, as I say, maybe it's the politics is easier if you're talking about people and somebody coming in to take your job, but not necessarily a robot in progress. Yeah. So it's something that's been said since the election. I read quite a bit about automation, but boy, we didn't hear about it.
I don't think either side politically benefited from the big discussion of automation because it's still taking a job.
Real possibility, and especially if we have mass deportations. There are going to be robots on farms in the Central Valley.
And self-driving cars and self-driving trucks and all sorts of things coming.
The economy has shown the ability to adapt to automation. I mean, look at agriculture. 100 years ago, we had, half the population engaged in agriculture, and it went down to 2%, and we found jobs for people in other sectors. So the economy tends to adapt.
But will it always? Always a question. We'll have to see going forward. All right, we're going to shift gears again here. One of the most important issues facing America and, of course, the rest of the planet is climate change and protecting the environment. Seeing that Donald Trump and many of his advisors, notably the nominee to head the EPA, have called human-caused climate change a hoax, things appear dire indeed. The president-elect's chief concern seems to be that climate mitigation will have consequences for businesses. Here he is in a recent interview.
Many years ago, I believe it was in the 1920s, they talked about the phenomena of global cooling. They thought the planet was getting cooler. Now they think the planet is getting warmer. And I have a feeling it's sort of this. But nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows for sure. But I do say this, we have to be careful because our companies are being put at tremendous disadvantage in terms of the world markets.
Well, Craig, nobody knows for sure if your house is going to burn down, but we all get fire insurance. Anyway, we can debate this going forward, but can we expect the U.S. to be a lonely left behind polluting power as the rest of the world acts on climate change?
I think we may see kind of a bifurcation at the federal level. That is possible. I mean, Trump has a wish list that could be, from most environmentalist perspective, could be devastating. So there's no question about that. On the other hand, the states and cities are on a different course. So we may see kind of a bifurcation.
Yeah, as we were saying at the first segment here, where California is leading the way, and of course, if we were, we'd be something in the top 6, 7, 8 economies in the world if we were a country on our own. So it does have some clout. But without the other states, how much can one state do, or even a few states?
Well, it's not one state. I think 29 states have renewable portfolio standards. 29 states have committed to developing renewable energy and set targets and set enforceable targets for it. I think another 8 states have goals towards renewable energy. So you have the vast majority of states already on a renewable energy course.
Well, let's talk a bit about Scott Pruitt. That's Trump's choice to head the Environmental Protection Agency. Not exactly the guy you would think who would take EPA forward as a robust tiger when it comes to fighting the...
No, he has sued the EPA, and he has sued the EPA over overreach. He sued to block the Clean Power Plan, which is Obama's plan to reduce emissions from electric generating stations. And he sued to block restrictions of methane emissions from oil and gas installations, which many believe are devastating for the environment. Mm-hmm. So he has a history of being quite antagonistic to the EPA's current path. Mm-hmm. No question about that.
Chris?
You know, I wonder with California leading the way and so many states focusing on renewable energy, whether some of the changes, the long-term changes, are just unstoppable at this point. I mean, people are not going to take down rooftop solar. Here in San Diego Gas and Electric is already at over a third renewable energy. More and more people are driving electric cars. There's a big economic incentive now toward clean energy that maybe a Trump administration can't stop.
Right, Craig, you and environmental activist Bill Powers had a piece in the UT saying it's not all doom and gloom, and that was one of the points you were making.
Well, one of the things Chris raises a good point. And Trump seems to see the environment as renewables as a problem. And many people see renewable energy as one of the great wealth opportunities of the past 50 years or 100 years. If we rewired this planet for renewable energy, there's a huge wealth opportunity. Once you install renewable energy, your fuel cost is zero, right, going forward. So is glass half empty, glass half full. There's tremendous momentum on the business side towards renewable energy.
And jobs, too. The Center for Sustainable Energy had a report recently that there are over 100,000 jobs in San Diego that are due to clean energy and other environmental-related industries.
Well, nationally, there's there's 60,000 coal jobs, which Trump has focused on. There's 300,000 jobs in wind and solar, and growing very rapidly, while the number of jobs in coal are
well, and it's not the demon EPA, really, that killed the coal market. It's fracking and the cheap natural gas, right?
Oh, yeah. Florida Power and Light's going to close a coal-burning power plant on New Year's Eve because it's too expensive. NRG has closed. Another big power producer has closed coal plants because they're too expensive.
All right, we do have another bite here I wanted to get to. Let's hear that.
I remember back in 1978, I proposed a Landsat satellite for California. They called me Governor Moonbeam because of that. I didn't get that moniker for nothing. And if Trump turns off the satellites, California will launch its own damn satellite. We're going to collect that data.
All right, Governor Moonbeam is back. Michael, we're going to launch our own damn satellite?
Well, it's interesting, and what's real and what is being imagined of the coming administration, we'll just have to see. But there were reports that people in the scientific community were hurriedly saving their files and stuff because not only were they concerned about policies being reversed, but that the federal government, the big brother, would come in and destroy or take their data, which helps prove the direction things are going in. So is that paranoia? I don't know. I mean, look, I'm sure that happens every time there's an administration coming in. People do save stuff like that. But there is this real concern that suddenly we're going to go back to the dark ages. But as both Chris and Craig point out, and Sandra, along the border and in energy, I mean, so much has happened, and even in healthcare, that suddenly if you just stop something, it's going to be such dislocation. It won't be as easy to do. And so you know, the reality of governing, as much as Trump's bluster is there, will be a kind of a cruel awakening, I think.
All right, got about a minute left. Look to other countries. China is looking to be a leader now in alternative energy and solar, certainly. Germany has made great strides here. Wouldn't Trump's competitiveness say, hey, U.S. isn't going to be left behind when it comes to competing with these countries?
You would think. China is the leader in alternative energy. China has more renewable energy facilities than the U.S. has.
And tremendous air problems
yes.
they have to do something about.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And so I would think the competitive businessman there say American industries are going to compete with these folks.
Well, the challenge is, can the economics move fast enough to overcome the physics of climate change? That's the issue. So you can't stop the economics, but can it move quickly enough?
Yeah, and we'll see. Well, who knows? Who knows how long it'll take and what all these agencies are going to do and who's going to fight them and who's going to join them. And it's going to be a fascinating year. We'll get you all back here soon to talk about all of that. Well, we are out of time. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Michael Smolens of the San Diego Union Tribune, Chris Genowine of Times of San Diego, Sandra Dibble, also of the Union Tribune, and freelance reporter Craig Rose. Thank you all. Now, a reminder, all of the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.